Crocodile Paradox. Let's suppose your child has been snatched by a crocodile. You're standing at the edge of a river, your heart pounding, your breath shallow. The crocodile looks at you with its cold, unblinking eyes and says, "I will return your child, if and only if you can correctly guess what I will do next." At this moment, your world freezes. You realize this isn't just a life or death situation, it's a logical trap. No matter what you answer, you're stepping into a paradox. This dilemma has baffled philosophers and thinkers for centuries. It's not just a puzzle about a predator and its prey. It's a profound exploration of knowledge, logic, and the limits of certainty. Let's carefully walk through this tangled web of reasoning. You have two possible answers to give the crocodile. Consider the first scenario. In this scenario, you predict that the crocodile will return your child. If the crocodile plans to return your child, your prediction is correct, and the crocodile fulfills its promise. Everything aligns, and your child is safe. But if the crocodile plans to keep your child, your prediction is wrong, and the crocodile isn't bound to return the child. In this scenario, everything remains logically consistent because the outcome depends entirely on whether your prediction aligns with the crocodile's intention. The real paradox emerges in the second scenario. In this scenario, you predict that the crocodile will not return your child. If the crocodile plans to keep the child, your prediction is correct. But now the crocodile is forced to return the child because your prediction was accurate. This creates a contradiction because the crocodile cannot both keep the child and honor its promise to return them. When your prediction is correct, on the other hand, if the crocodile plans to return the child, your prediction is wrong, and by the terms of the deal, the crocodile should not have returned the child in the first place. In either case, the crocodile is trapped in a logical contradiction. So what's really going on here? The crocodile paradox is a classic example of a self-referential paradox where a statement refers to itself in a way that creates an impossible situation. It's similar to the famous liar's paradox, where someone says, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. The crocodile paradox operates on this same slippery logic, where the crocodile's promise collapses under its own weight. But beyond the logical puzzle, the crocodile paradox also raises deeper philosophical questions. At its core, it's about the nature of promises, truth, and trust. If a promise creates a scenario where it cannot logically be kept, is it really a promise at all? And if a situation is built on contradictory rules, can any outcome truly be fair or just? In a way, the paradox reflects real-world situations where agreements are made under flawed premises. Think about legal contracts filled with loopholes, political promises built on conflicting conditions, or even personal dilemmas where every choice seems to backfire. The crocodile paradox isn't just a grain teaser. It's a mirror reflecting the complexity and imperfection of the promises we make and the expectations we set. But let's not forget the crocodile in this story. The paradox also reveals something about power and control. The crocodile isn't just a passive participant in this riddle, it's the architect of the trap. By setting the rules in a way that guarantees contradiction, the crocodile ensures that no answer can fully satisfy the agreement. In a sense, it represents authority structures or systems where the rules are intentionally rigged to maintain control even in the face of logic and fairness. So, can this paradox ever be solved? Philosophers have debated this question for centuries, and the general consensus is no. The paradox isn't meant to have a resolution because it's not about finding an answer, it's about understanding the problem. It's a thought experiment designed to expose the limits of language, logic, and our assumptions about fairness and promises. But perhaps the real lesson of the crocodile paradox is this: not every question has an answer. Not every problem can be untangled through pure reasoning, and sometimes the power lies not in solving the puzzle, but in recognizing the trap it creates. So if you ever find yourself face to face with a crocodile offering a deal that seems impossible to fulfill, remember this paradox. Sometimes the game is rigged from the start, and the only winning move is to recognize the paradox for what it is, a cleverly constructed trap hiding behind the illusion of choice. Friendship paradox. Why do your friends seem to have more friends than you? It's not just in your head, it's a real phenomenon called the friendship paradox. This counterintuitive idea suggests that, on average, your friends are more popular than you are. How is that possible? And more importantly, what does it reveal about the way we interact, connect, and compare ourselves to others? Let's start with the math behind the paradox. Imagine a social network. Not the kind on your phone, but the web of connections that links people together. Some individuals have only a few friends, while others are social butterflies, connected to dozens or even hundreds of people. The friendship paradox emerges because people with lots of friends are more likely to be your friends. Why? Think of it this way. If someone has 100 friends, they have 100 chances to be connected to you, while someone with only 2 friends has just 2 chances. In a network, the popular people act as hubs, disproportionately influencing the average number of friends your friends have. This mathematical quirk means that when you compare yourself to your friends, you're more likely to be comparing yourself to someone with above-average popularity. And because of this bias, your friends, on average, will seem to have more connections than you do. The paradox isn't just about self-perception. It's a reflection of how networks operate, from social circles to the internet. But the friendship paradox doesn't stop at numbers. It has profound psychological and social implications, especially in an age dominated by social media. When we scroll through platforms like Instagram or Facebook, we often see the highlights of other people's lives, vacations, parties, achievements, shared by our most connected friends. This creates the illusion that everyone else is more popular, more successful, or more interesting than we are. The friendship paradox explains why this illusion is so pervasive. We're naturally more exposed to the lives of the most connected individuals, amplifying the sense of comparison. This can have a significant impact on mental health. Research shows that social comparison is a key driver of anxiety,
Depression.
envy,
The friendship
and
paradox reminds us that these comparisons are often based on a distorted perspective. Your friends might seem more connected, but that's largely because of how networks work, not because you're less valuable or less connected yourself. Interestingly, the friendship paradox isn't just a curiosity. It has practical applications in public health. For example, it's used to identify influential individuals in social networks during a disease outbreak. Health officials might target vaccination campaigns or public health messages to people who are more connected, as they're more likely to influence others. By leveraging the paradox, we can improve the spread of helpful information and curb the spread of harmful misinformation or diseases. The paradox also sheds light on the dynamics of influence and inequality in networks. In any network, whether it's a group of friends, a professional community, or a social media platform, connections aren't distributed evenly. A small number of individuals often hold a disproportionate amount of influence. The friendship paradox reveals how this inequality shapes our perceptions, interactions, and even opportunities. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the friendship paradox is what it teaches us about perspective. It reminds us that our view of the world is always partial, shaped by the connections and relationships we have. Just as your friends seem more popular, your perception of other aspects of life, success, happiness, or wealth, might be skewed by the people you're exposed to. The paradox invites us to question these perceptions, to recognize their limitations, and to focus on what truly matters. The friendship paradox isn't just about numbers, it's about understanding how we relate to others and how networks influence our lives. It challenges us to rethink the way we compare ourselves to others, to see beyond the surface of popularity, and to appreciate the unique connections we have. Because in the end, it's not about how many friends you have. It's about the depth, meaning, and quality of those relationships, and no paradox can take that away from you. Tolerance paradox. Can a tolerant society remain tolerant if it tolerates intolerance? This is the tolerance paradox, a profound and troubling dilemma first introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. It challenges the very foundation of what it means to live in an open, free society. At its core is a simple yet uncomfortable question. How far should we go in accepting opposing viewpoints, especially when those viewpoints threaten the very fabric of tolerance itself? Let's imagine a society built on the principle of tolerance. People are free to express their beliefs, live how they want, and engage in open dialogue. But then an intolerant ideology begins to emerge, one that rejects the values of tolerance and actively works to suppress others' freedoms. What should the tolerant society do? If it tolerates the intolerant, it risks being overrun by those who reject tolerance altogether. But if it doesn't tolerate the intolerant, hasn't it abandoned its own principle of tolerance? This is the heart of the paradox. Tolerance is often seen as an absolute good, but the tolerance paradox reveals its limits. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that tolerance, when taken to an extreme, can become self-destructive. Popper introduced this idea in his 1945 book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. He argued that unlimited tolerance leads to the erosion of tolerance itself. If a society allows intolerant ideologies to take root and spread unchecked, those ideologies can eventually undermine the freedoms that made the society tolerant in the first place. Popper's solution was clear but controversial. A tolerant society must reserve the right to be intolerant toward intolerance. On the surface, this might sound contradictory. After all, how can a society committed to tolerance justify being intolerant? But Popper's argument isn't about suppressing disagreement or silencing opposing viewpoints. It's about drawing a line when those viewpoints actively threaten the rights and safety of others. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict or disagreement, but to protect the very conditions that make a tolerant society possible. The tolerance paradox isn't just a philosophical puzzle, it has real-world implications. Consider freedom of speech, one of the cornerstones of a tolerant society. Should this freedom extend to those who use it to spread hate speech, incite violence, or advocate for the suppression of others' freedoms? Some argue that even the most offensive ideas should be allowed in the name of free expression, trusting that open debate will expose and discredit harmful views. Others contend that allowing such speech can create an environment where intolerance thrives, ultimately putting vulnerable groups at risk. History offers plenty of examples where the tolerance paradox is played out in dramatic ways. In the early 20th century, many democratic nations tolerated the rise of authoritarian movements, believing they could coexist with democratic values. But in cases like Nazi Germany, that tolerance allowed intolerant ideologies to gain power and dismantle democracy from within. These historical lessons show that unchecked tolerance can have devastating consequences. But where should we draw the line? This is where the tolerance paradox becomes especially tricky. Not all forms of intolerance are equally dangerous, and not all disagreements threaten the fabric of society. Disagreeing with someone's political views or cultural practices isn't the same as advocating for their suppression. The challenge lies in distinguishing between harmful intolerance that needs to be addressed and healthy conflict that should be encouraged. Critics of Popper's idea often raise concerns about who gets to decide what counts as intolerant. They argue that labeling certain ideas or groups as intolerant can be subjective and prone to abuse. A government or group in power could misuse this principle to silence dissent under the guise of protecting tolerance. This highlights the delicate balance a society must strike between protecting itself and avoiding authoritarianism. The tolerance paradox also raises important questions about human psychology and group dynamics. Intolerance often arises from fear, ignorance, or a sense of threat. Addressing these underlying causes through education, dialogue, and empathy can be more effective than simply suppressing intolerant ideas. But even these approaches have limits, especially when dealing with ideologies that are fundamentally opposed to dialogue or compromise. In today's polarized world, the tolerance paradox feels more relevant than ever. We see debates over free speech, censorship, and the boundaries of tolerance play out daily, from social media platforms to political arenas. As we navigate these challenges, the paradox reminds us that tolerance isn't just about accepting differences,
It's about actively protecting the principles that make coexistence possible. So what can we learn from the tolerance paradox? First, it teaches us that tolerance has limits, and those limits are necessary to preserve the values we hold dear. Second, it challenges us to think critically about how we respond to intolerance, whether through open dialogue, legal protections, or in extreme cases, restrictions. And finally, it reminds us that tolerance isn't a static principle. It's a dynamic process, one that requires constant effort to uphold. In the end, the paradox doesn't weaken the idea of tolerance, it strengthens it by showing us that true tolerance is not about accepting everything, but about standing firm in defense of what matters most. Paradox of choice. Imagine walking into an ice cream shop. You're craving something sweet and you're ready to indulge. But instead of the usual 5 or 6 flavors, you're greeted with 50 options. Chocolate, vanilla, pistachio, salted caramel, mango sorbet, rocky road, and so many more. At first, you're thrilled. But as you try to decide, you start to feel overwhelmed. You second-guess yourself. What if you choose pistachio but miss out on the salted caramel? What if rocky road would have been perfect? Suddenly, what should have been a simple and joyful decision turns into a stressful, exhausting ordeal. This is the paradox of choice. The idea that, while